In the autumn of 1952, the first hydrogen device, codenamed Ivy Mike, is detonated. Modeled after the A-bomb but generating an explosion an order of magnitude more powerful, the H-bomb does further violence to the notion that a third world war is winnable. Invasion U.S.A., episode 602, is an interesting instance of a propaganda piece that straddles these two ways of understanding atomic war, as either conventional war by other means or seed of irreversible cataclysm. This is because it is produced before Ivy Mike but released afterward. Just as with the Murrow broadcast last year in Invasion U.S.A., the television can distort space. Here, though, it's the local space that's being distorted. The film opens in an unnamed Manhattan watering hole where a line of barflies drown their sorrows under the glow of an oversized TV screen. The screen is embedded in the restaurant's far wall, rather than, as most bar TVs are at this time, mounted high in a corner, and is at the same time as imaginary a technology essentially as Unga's reflector plate. Since they operate at a different frame rate, televisions can't simply be filmed on set in 35mm movies. This generates a wide interference line that continually scrolls up the screen, ruining the scene's realism. For this reason, in a movie with any respectable budget at all, televisions are rendered in process shots. In this circumstance, it's easier to simulate a flat screen than to try and recreate the subtle edge distortions of a CRT's curved screen, and it's unlikely it has even occurred to Hollywood's special effects craftsmen to try. The effect of this is to give television in movies a science fiction look, even when none is intended, so that their images always seem to be beamed in not from another part of the world, but from another world entirely. On the fancy flat screen, a news anchor is making dire announcements about the state of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, with global leaders refusing to rule out the possibility of all-out war.
Shut that thing off,
snarls a patron in country and western garb.
I got enough war talk at home.
His clan is no follower of date with your family's wise advice, evidently. The bartender informs him that, in an unlikely turn, the man on the TV is a patron of that very establishment.
The TV station's right down the street.
When he turns the volume down, he jokes.
I wish I could keep him that quiet when he comes in here.
We're only a minute in, and already the television is a totemic presence. In one sense, it transcends its status as a mere appliance. Its high-tech screen shines brighter than dull workaday CRTs. Its celebrities cycle in and out of the bar in the flesh. In another sense, it's viscerally repellent, so much so that the patrons express their contempt for it over and over. The bartender incongruously asks what sort of drink the TV anchor prefers when he comes in, and a suspicious, sullen stranger flipping through his paper speculates, a sherry flip, a drink notorious for being a chore to concoct and the likely cause of a cruel hangover. So much for the experiment in tavern televisions. Having established this particular setup, the film briskly segues into an ensemble piece, says another commentator from the corner station. TVNY strolls into the bar and starts surveying everyone's opinions regarding America's general state of military readiness. Ed, who'd so recently expressed frustration over the amount of war talk he was getting at home, now goes on about the subject at some length, though this is largely to complain about the sacrifices needed to fund it. Small wonder. 3/4 of the American budget is going to national defense in 1952, a fact Invasion U.S.A. fails to mention. Ed informs Vince, the commentator, that government cost controls have kept him from expanding his ranch from 3,000 head of cattle to 5. George, a tractor manufacturer, how convenient that these captains of industry would turn up in this random cocktail bar for Vince to survey, recounts as to how an Army liaison once visited his factory with a pitch to transition to tank building, and he drove the pitchman from his office with an angry shake of the fist.
The people of this country will never stand for a police state,
he hollered after him. His date, Carla, admits to having worked in a military equipment factory in the last war. Interesting that for her, World War II stands out in no particular way. Rather, it's simply the most recent in a procession of more or less indistinguishable conflicts.
It ruined my hand,
she says.
So I quit.
A blustery gentleman in a bow tie at the other end of the bar picks this awkward moment to make his presence known. Offering the house a round of drinks and free cigars, he introduces himself as an Illinois congressman, yet another astonishing turn of events, who is, as a consequence, uniquely equipped to opine about the political positioning of the American body politic. They're against communists, he declares, efficiently summarizing the dilemma, but another thing the people don't like is war. This is indeed the crux of the emerging problem of containing alleged Soviet expansionism, or, depending on who you believe, sustaining the massive and now evidently permanent U.S. wartime economy. Americans, like any other halfway sensible people, mostly want to live their lives, pursue their interests and goals, and keep out of others' business. Thus, the only way to persuade these good folks to expend their blood, treasure, and labor on a seemingly imaginary threat is via hocus pocus. Unsurprisingly, this comes in the form of Omen, a dark stranger in the corner who the TVNY commentator approaches in the interest of completing a survey.
I am a forecaster.
Omen, the stranger, informs Vince when asked of his profession. Vince presumes that Omen means to say a weather forecaster and writes this down in his notes. And though we later learn Omen is more of a mystical prognosticator, weatherman isn't too far off the mark. As a guess, the state of meteorology in 1952 is such that it owes as much to guesswork and mysticism as to science.
I think America wants new leadership.
Omen offers on the topic of the country's war readiness. It's not out of bounds to take this as a dig at President Truman, whose approval ratings are hovering at around 30%.
What kind of leadership do you suggest?
I suggest a wizard.
A what?
Vince is here and understandably incredulous.
A wizard like Merlin, who could kill his enemies by wishing them dead. That's the way we'd like to beat communism now, by wishing it dead. The manufacturer wants more war orders and lower taxes. Labor wants more consumer products and a 30-hour week. The college boy wants a stronger army and a deferment for himself. The businessman wants a bigger Air Force and a new Cadillac. The housewife wants security and an electric dishwasher. Everybody wants a strong America, and we all want the same man to pay for it.
This man turns out to be George, the tractor manufacturer. Omen's presumption in this rather captivating monologue. Whatever you think of the movie overall, Dan O'Herlihy does quite a job as Omen. Seems to be that the most economically productive citizens take up the slack for everyone else, otherwise disposed as we are in selfishly pursuing happiness and fulfillment. Note here the sudden rush of binaries, hating communism but also hating war, wanting military contracts while seeming not to know that tax revenue pays for them, basking in the freedom afforded by a strong military but preferring not to enlist, and so on. These ongoing dialectics are foundational to the epistemology of the Cold War, in the sense that they require an essentially peacetime state in order to be operative. This was best illustrated in the European theater during World War II. Britain felt obligated to switch entirely to a wartime economy so that all questions of 30-hour weeks and electric dishwashers were largely set aside. Germany, on the other hand, hoped to maintain a more balanced economy throughout the late 30s and early 40s, and lost the war in part because of this. The choice between an air force and a luxury car is made for you when the first bomb falls on your nation's capital. Where it comes to this, the United States was positioned in a unique position relative to the nations of Europe even during the war. Her capitals and major cities stood unscathed in 1945, with the exception of some East Coast naval action. Her conversion to an all-out war economy was largely the result of popular will combined with propaganda and persuasion. Her stake in the conflict, all good war talk aside, was essentially the defense of a modest empire in the Philippines and mid-Pacific that she had seized in the decades immediately previous. For Germany, Britain, and Russia, by contrast, bare survival was at issue. Their capitals had been struck. They stood at risk of obliteration. Thus, where for European culture at large, war has a visceral and immediate quality, for America, war has always been and continues to be an abstraction, an intellectual, spiritual, and mystical exercise. The hypnotist Omen says as much presently.
To win a war.
He intones in his usual sinister and opaque register.
A nation must concentrate.
He then twirls his brandy, and the patrons at the bar all fall into a reverie, mesmerized. The film, which has up to now been quite a bit of fun, now lapses into tedium as it gets to its point. Agent or agents unknown have dispatched Omen to impress on the group the importance of the war effort, which he does by demonstrating the consequences should they continue in their apathy. We consequently bear witness to the don'ts scenario so studiously elided in How to Survive an Atomic Bomb, and a military procedural Omen beams into their minds. This is not to say Invasion U.S.A. couldn't have been quite an actioner with a little more financial backing. Its scenario is a bracing one. Sensing America's lack of resolve, Russia mounts a surprise attack on Alaska and the West Coast, which stirs the horrified bar crowd to clap out of their huddle. George heads to San Francisco, Ed hightails it to Arizona, and so on. Meanwhile, the war rages with aerial dogfights, bombing raids, infantry battles, all of this unfortunately rendered with an over-reliance on stock footage, and edited with a dreary repetition that's likely meant to stand in for the stomach-churning monotony of war. Big-budget special effects could have turned this into quite a set piece, but the splicing together of stock and staged footage here has some interesting results nonetheless. Seeing A-bombs as having tactical benefits similar to those of conventional explosives, Russia deploys them similarly, dropping them on airfields and fuel depots along with population centers. The film renders this in the usual way by intercutting World War II vintage real-life shots of cascading bombs, incinerating swaths of landscape with staged shots of villainous Soviet bombardiers mashing a kill switch with their thumbs to release the ordnance. It's tempting to assume the filmmakers were somehow unaware that the point of the A-bomb is to effect with one device what previously required hundreds, but it's more likely that practical limitations are to blame for the cognitive dissonance here. Considering World War II's all-consuming nature, it simply was not possible to find any substantial footage of a single bomb dropping on its target. The detonations are simulated by having establishing shots, runways, factory silos, the Golden Gate Bridge, cut jarringly to non-matching shots of atomic bomb test explosions. Here again, the goal is to showcase the atomic bomb as a mere extension of conventional explosives in terms of tactical and strategic utility. But the effect is to coax the viewer, this viewer anyway, into imagining what would happen if the atomic bomb tests being conducted, as often as not in the same Philippine Islands the United States had so recently expended vast blood and treasure to reclaim, were to be redirected onto America's soil. One's own universe trembles.
Oh, that's a hot one.
Everyone wants George to do it.
Except George.
A very good joke, but was not won by making jokes.